So, good evening, everyone, and thank you for spending your Tuesday evening with us. We're having some year in 2020, and I can tell you there's 129 days left for 2020 to end, and I hope they go really, really fast. And I think tonight's talk, the title is very aptly titled, Nostalgic Past, a Dystopian Present, and Imagined Futures. And who better to join us than Alia, whose artistic practice has been exploring this enigma of our world. And, I think we're in for a treat with what she has to say. But before we get into the thick of things, I'd like to thank Al Online for hosting us tonight. They fully embraced the platform, the online platform, when we went into this weird space to continue the discourse around our artistic practice during these times. And if you haven't checked out the platform, please do. There's some real gems in there. There's everything from music concerts to pecha kucha to engaging talks, art projects, and a lot of exhibitions that were hosted during March that you can see. And if we have another lockdown, which I hope we don't, we're going to be all set. So, and at September 2nd, they will have a roundtable titled "How Will We Return," which again is seems really intriguing and interesting. So try and join that, please. And to get started, I'm going to introduce my collaborator tonight, Miranda Mckee, joining us from Toronto in Canada. Miranda is no stranger to many of you, having been with us at GPP for many years, and then with Al Avenue. She's responsible for a lot of the good things that happened at GPP. She was with us at the very start when we moved to the Avenue in 2011, and a lot of where we've reached has been influenced and shaped by her curatorship and her emphasis on community building. So we're very proud to have associate with Miranda, and even though she's not with us, her legacy and impact lives on. And of course, she did a lot of the programming last summer at Al, so we truly miss her. And she's currently based in Toronto and working as a freelance curator of public arts programming and exhibitions. She has a fantastic reading of photographs and an eye for detail, and I've learned so much from her meticulous approach in conceiving and executing exhibitions. And Alia, of course, can attest to that, I'm sure, as she was instrumental in producing this beautiful show that we had of Alia's work in 2017 at our gallery here in Al Avenue. Over to you, Miranda.
Thank you so very much for that lovely introduction. I'm really thrilled that we have this opportunity to come together as friends and as colleagues and collaborators to share this digital space in a pandemic when it's not possible to share physical space in some cases. As Mohammed mentioned, I had the pleasure of working for GPP for many years, and I feel that the work that Mohammed and his team continue to do is exactly what we need more of in this strange new world. GPP played a key role in building community and providing education and skill development, and also supporting the growth and development of visual storytellers in the Middle East and beyond. So thank you to GPP, and thank you to Al for providing us with this platform for a discussion today. So I met Alia during my time at GPP, and I had a wonderful time working with her on the exhibition Borderland, which took place in 2017. And what initially struck me about Alia was her passion for the exploration of her practice. She was willing to get her hands dirty, staying late into the night with me, making the final touches on the exhibition installation. And it was in those wee hours that I began to understand more about her history and about the motivation behind her work. She explained that she was raised within 5 different languages, and early on in her practice, she traveled to 67 different countries. After some time, she realized that she saw imagery as a way of communicating beyond the limitations of language. And her work continues to explore the politics and poetics of identity, pushing and pulling upon physical borders and challenging the mental and physical spaces of confinement, which are built around us. Beyond Dubai, her work has been shown in Marrakesh, in Madrid, in Frankfurt, and London, as well as Washington, Los Angeles, New Orleans, and beyond. She's been featured in a number of publications and has lectured extensively, including at Harvard University, at the LACMA, the Middle East Institute, and the Arab American Museum. Alia has won a number of awards, including the Lens Culture Emerging Artist Award and the Alan Sekula Social Documentary Grant. Alia has recently been based in LA, where she completed her MFA in photography and media at the California Institute of Arts. Currently in Tijuana. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alia.
Wow, I'm really touched. Thank you so much for that introduction. But I also wanted to say to all of you, first of all, Mohammed, thank you so much for always being a family. I was actually at GPP that I had my first solo show, and at the time, I think whatever is the artist before an emerging artist, you really gave me that support, and you continue to. And I know, especially beginning of COVID, you made sure to check in, and so for that, you've also become a family. Miranda, I mean, you continue to be a mentor to me, but also a sister. And thank you very much to Al Serkal for continuing to create a platform for artists, but also to consider the artists of the diaspora, which not all foundations do. So thank you for keeping us there. I'm really excited to be a part of this talk. Thanks. Let's dive in.
Yes, let's do that. What I wanted to start off with was if you could tell us a little bit more about your history, because I feel that plays an important role as a foundation in your practice and the work exploration that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's my personal history and then there's my artistic history. So my personal history is that I was born in Austria, but my parents, my mother is from former Yugoslavia, currently Bosnia, and my father's from South Yemen. We grew up mostly in Yemen until the age of 13, and during that time, the borders have shifted in both countries, in which they became renamed, hence Bosnia and Yemen. We then moved to the United States, a few years later, September 11th happened. And I think that really created a huge shift in how I thought. So my parents, as you mentioned, that I grew up around many languages, and it wasn't only because of travel, but because they're also linguists. And those were also sort of formative years in seeing how language can be, and something that I talk about frequently, how language is both this way of communicating, but it's an inclusion, but it certainly is also about exclusion. And that became really evident in these years post September 11th, and I would say all the way up to now, and has become the basis of how I became an artist, because I did my undergraduate in politics with political sciences, and somehow I managed to accumulate all of these credits in studio art and found myself as a double major. So I started in film, and then I kind of stepped away from art and worked more, actually not really stepped away, but I moved to Morocco. So the United States, I guess, wasn't really, even though I am a US citizen, I'd become naturalized at that point, which in and of itself is bizarre, from alien to naturalized. But I went to Morocco, and in fact, in Morocco, I felt even more home than I do in the United States. And it maintains to be one of my homes. And if there are any Moroccans out there who are now listening, thank you very much for embracing me. And so there I really found a lot of the inspiration because of also the sort of artistic community there. I worked in administration and sort of doing preparatory work for other artists, for TEDx. We're also creating platforms like for TEDx Marrakesh and the Marrakesh Biennial. And then I decided to kind of work on my own practice. And that was around 2015.
Miranda mentioned at the top of the at your intro that you were always intrigued and influenced by the languages that were around you. You know, your parents were linguists and spoke multiple languages, and that really kind of, I think, shaped the beginning of your work. And can you tell us about your first project, specifically Cast No Evo? And while you're doing that, I'll put up some of the images so people can see them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's sort of, two questions there. I think in terms of language, I mean, let's sort of begin about narration, right, and stories. And I think how language actually ended up developing and coming into textile. So I'll go into, my parents are linguists. They share actually 7 languages between them, but they can only speak English, they can speak 7 languages, but only share English between them. And it was interesting also through my father's work as a translator, seeing how in fact, when translation happens, even when transliteration happens, it's very much done to the agenda of whoever is that client. So what is left out? What are the tones? What, what are inflections? And I think, and especially during that time, and also coming to the United States and thinking about how I also have to change my accent, how to assimilate as much as possible, how to try to be included. And even to this day, as you mentioned, I just finished at grad school, writing is a part of my practice. I even had faculty who said that it doesn't read as a native writer. And yet that's something to me that, as an Arabic speaker, and especially from Yemen, we come from oral histories. And so I'll dive into that because as oral histories, the way in which, for example, my grandmother from Yemen, the way that she documented was actually through her textiles. She was illiterate in Arabic, in written Arabic and written Hebrew, but it doesn't mean that we don't document. So it was documented, and we can see that actually manifest in different ways in terms of, for example, our architecture. But with her specifically, it was textiles, and we always grew up around textiles. And when you think about how our history was told in Yemen, it was in fact done by people who weren't us in a language that wasn't us, namely for our colonizers, the British. And so the damage was already done before it hit the paper because there was this translation to the agenda of somebody else. And, when you see how Yemen is sort of seen through the lens of media, even, Google, it really is, it doesn't even closely parallel or match to the experiences that I have. And so thinking about textile, the word text in English comes from the word textile. It's not the other way around. And so when you think about the symbolisms, particularly for indigenous groups, and that the patterns that are invoked in and that manifest into these fabrics, that is a language. And Cast No Evil really began, there was a project that I did before called Speak an Image, and it really wasn't for anyone except myself. It was sort of after not holding the camera for 10 years. And I decided to go to the places, quite frankly, that I wanted to see before I die. And it just happened to be what I found, that I was attracted to the places which the language, it didn't become really something that was important for me to be able to communicate. We depend so much on the written language, on the writing. But, going to Mongolia, for example, going even though in India, they have these, you have a lot of English, but also seeing Hindi, Zanzibar, Kyrgyzstan, Nepal, and kind of focusing a little bit more about the images around. And what I found that I was really drawn to while taking these photographs was textiles. And in Cast No Evil, I was in Morocco actually when I started taking them, and it was after a photo shoot that I did with Hassan Hajjaj, who's actually become a mentor. He was photographing me, and he told me at the end, he said, you should really photograph yourself. And I don't know, I thought that was kind of stuck in my head, and I didn't really have much. It was a little bit of a difficult time, but what I did realize is that I had everything around me, and these were these textiles, and I started pulling them out, and thinking about the camera sort of also as just like I talked about language, that language can be a weapon, that the camera can also be, in fact, a weapon because of the power of the photographer on one side. And so I wanted to, in this one, really think about being on both sides of it, being both the observer and the observed. So these are auto portraits, what I wouldn't necessarily call them self-portraits. And I sit, I use the fabrics and basically created this staging, right? And this sort of speaks to what I'm doing now. And I think what a lot of artists do is creating this fourth dimension, this other space in which we can see ourselves. And the fabric then really kind of talks about borders and barriers. What is it that different, about power, even between, the observer and the observed. And that, of course, lended itself into Borderland very much so. So I think with Borderland, I think that was also, kind of extending out from Yemen, really, like from this, narrative that I saw. This was, the Borderland series was really inspired by rage, I would say, definitely. And I think, this was exactly about 4 years ago. And in the United States, every 4 years you have the elections. And as you might know, this year is the other elections. And it was the lead up when Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were sort of going through the primaries, and there were all of these horrible things as I'm sitting in Mexico that were being said about everyone, unless they were sort of white, male, Christian, conservative. And there was something really horrible, which I don't think the necessity to repeat, about Mexicans. And what I realized during that time was also, after so many years of these sort of triggering and traumatizing things that were being said about Muslims and about Arabs and about women, there's a part of it that it becomes sort of that I become desensitized to it, which is, I think, really dangerous. And I started to think, I looked up, just curious, I kind of do this a lot, where I look up things on Google, and then I just put in a word or a place, and then I see the images just to see what is the visual narrative that people are drawn to. And of course it changes by computers, but not actually as drastically as we think. And when I saw it, I saw, for example, Yemen. I mean, when we think about how things are, how Orientalism is actually really alive, you look at Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and you see that the Pantone, the color is the same. Everything looks like it's in desert. You see red, you see, limp bodies. When I was looking at Mexico, the first thing that came up were drug cartels and, Cinco de Mayo. And these were completely not the images that I had in mind. And what I was thinking about were the exceptional textiles. And so I thought, that I wanted to sort of, at least as an attempt, to break this narrative. And for the span of a year, I went to 11 different regions in the world, starting in Oaxaca, Mexico, to really explore how other indigenous communities, like mine in Yemen, but like how they, what their textiles meant, what are the symbols, what was the process of making them, and in a way to make a portrait of that society, not by looking at their faces or the eyes about this othering, essentially, but rather about their brilliance, about their minds, about what their hands could produce. And so it really becomes their portrait, but by what they make. And really acknowledging them not only as these, as masters, but also as really high artists, in my opinion. So I spent 5 to 6 weeks with them, introducing the camera at first, and really removing the camera, and then 5 to 6 weeks seeing the process and how they made it. And then together we would sort of collaborate in terms of which ones to pick, and it was them that sat beneath it, the textiles. And there is something important to say. So for example, when we installed at GPP, and every place after, thinking about photographs, these are representations, right? A photograph is a representation of something. And there is this danger of, as a photographer, and I think it's something that shifted. I certainly grew up on National Geographic. I was fortunate enough to see some of, be able to get some of these magazines, but there was also a danger in that choice. And I really believe that there is this activated capturing, these violent words as photographers that we use to shoot someone, to capture someone. And that's really what I wanted to avoid. And so I really wanted to collaborate. And so at different exhibitions, I actually would feature different master artisans with their textiles and create this architectural intervention in this space, where I would upholster the space, and also provide information so that people could buy directly the textiles from these masters. Yeah.
Cool. Go ahead, Miranda.
I think this is an interesting moment to bring up another conversation that we've had, because I think the exhibition of Borderland at GPP was one where people really did feel drawn to the work because of its sort of aesthetic presentation, but that gave them an opportunity to ask questions and to learn more about exactly what it was, the story that you were telling. And so I think this also brings up this ongoing debate where somehow aesthetic work is pinned against what is, considered more conceptual in the contemporary art world, particularly in institutions. And I wanted to hear a little bit more from you about your experience in those conversations, because I think it's important, within the context of your work. And I think that's something that is actually powerful about your work.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, actually, because it's something that, yeah, that I've dealt with quite a bit in the last 2 years. So as you mentioned, doing grad school, and I think it depends on which institutions you're talking about, because, I'm going to put this in quotes, the Western institutions, right? Because I really don't see that as much, because it's not really happening in, West Asia and South Asia, certainly, and in Africa, right? It is coming out certainly in, North America and in Europe, and it makes me think, what kind of an artist and who's your audience? What kind of artist do I want to be and who's the audience? And going to grad school, I mean, I think the power of work is like when I was talking about this idea of, and in our previous conversations about rage, I mean, I think there's so much anger, there's so much upset of like, how do you change certain things, being, culturally Muslim, Arab, even as a United States citizen, being critical of many things, how do you make your voice heard? And I think there's a part of that that's really important to turn it and make it into something really beautiful. It's a way for processing for myself. And I think many artists to turn it into something beautiful, but also something that can be discussed, something that can be talked about, something that can be brought out a little bit, or at least pulled out questions. And so I have no problem with the fact that my work is aesthetic and that it draws people, but also that there are questions that other people can process. And as I was in grad school, in fact, this has come up where people have come into my studio, faculty even, and have told me, you need to start from the beginning because perhaps it's too decorative. And this word keeps coming up, decorative. And I think before going to grad school, I really wanted my work to be, quite naively universal. And it's not. And I think I do have an audience. And I really, what I did realize were these very same faculty or people who used even this word as decorative and as something that didn't have the same power, that conceptual and aesthetic cannot live side by side, right? And I think that's also because the lack of understanding, because they, in the West, there's been such an active way of systematic erasure that has happened in other parts of the world in terms of removing the meaning, in terms of removing the beauty. When you come into a mosque and you see these, beautifully adorned walls with calligraphy, it's not just beauty, there's meaning, there's transcendence. I didn't grow up in a place like that. I grew up with textiles, sitting around textiles, touching them, feeling them. And in patterns. And I think that's just really an ignorance. And so I ended up finding that with people who maybe don't get it, it's because they're perhaps, and many of them, in fact, are, I mean, this might kind of go into the next, into the films that I'll be talking about, is that a lot of them were actually white faculty, who were from the United States, who maybe have not, who have the privilege of not having to see other parts of the world. And so as Arab, as artists from the region, we kind of want to answer to them. But there's also absolutely a way, and there's a necessity to say, I don't need to do the labor to explain to you all of my history and where I come from. You can do that because I did the labor of bringing this work to you. And I found with other faculty who may not have been actually from the region, I work with Colleen Smith, Mercedes Durame, one who's African-American futurist, another one who's a phenomenal indigenous artist, who said, I understand that this work is not for me, but I feel something for it. And I understand what this is. I see diaspora, I see tension, I see conflict, and I see the beauty of trying to pull something out of that. And that's fine. And I don't think that all work has to be for everyone. But I also think for younger artists, to not be apologetic about where they come from. And in order to think about the future, and to create work about the future, about placing us there, then we have to draw on our past, and we have to draw about what makes us unique. I mean, and what makes us different. I could keep going on that, but thank you for that question.
That's great, and thank you for tackling that. It's definitely an issue that comes up a lot, and I think you've articulated that beautifully. And just want to remind the audience to kind of save their questions. If you want to send them across in chat, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end. And I think this is a good cue to kind of move on to your current work. And I think a lot of what you said about the discourse that you had, after Borderland, has resulted in this new work that is very multi-layered and is very kind of bang on about the politics and the kind of happenings in our region. So I'm really excited about the video that you're going to that I'm going to ask you to talk about, which is Conflict is More Profitable Than Peace. But talk us through that transition from Borderland to that new work, and how that came about, and then you'll cue us to show some of that. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So, I mean, I mentioned earlier that I sort of started in film. I was interested in that, and then I thought, how can you really do film unless you understand photography, right? And you can understand the single frame. And I was still in that sort of mentality. And when I went to at this point, it was 2018, so exactly 2 years ago when I started the MFA. Which, by the way, if there are any also artists who are thinking about doing a master's program, it's not necessary. I will say that. It has absolutely changed the way that I thought, but I think that's something that you can find, and I certainly have mentors, but I think you can find these resources in different ways. For me, it was actually very influential because I went in knowing exactly what I wanted. I was an older student too. I knew exactly what I wanted to get out of it, and what I wanted to get out of it was that at that point, the war had been going on, the conflict had really kind of escalated and had been going on for a really long time in Yemen. And I think as artists who are from kind of turbulent places, or that are sort of lasting, there becomes this responsibility. And sometimes people, particularly when you're out of your native country, let's say, you become somehow an ambassador, and there's this expectation that you as an artist have to be talking, you are a Yemeni artist. Well, the truth is that I'm an artist, and if I want to make work about, I don't know, glass or water, I can do that. It doesn't constantly have to be about it. But there was this urge, and there was this necessity where it wasn't even a burden. It just felt like an absolute responsibility to address it. And on August 9th, 2018, right as I was beginning, there was a bombing of a school bus in Lahyan, Yemen. It was the Lahyan massacre, where over 40 children between the ages of 4 and 11 were killed by a mistargeted Lockheed Martin missile. And there wasn't, in fact, a lot of news that came out of it. And I was so sort of overwhelmed. I mean, that this mounting sort of collateral damage was happening, that I found this necessity, as maybe artists do, is to just dive into the work and kind of produce and try to get as much information from as many sources as possible. And what ended up happening was that my studio wall throughout the year became covered in information of timelines and lists, and this eventually became a binder. And when I was going through all of this information, I'd worked with two journalists, one from the New York Times and one from Yemen, to compile the list of victims, the names of the victims. But if I was going to name the victims, I also wanted to name the culprits. And it was also thinking about my relationship as, I think Michael Rakowitz, who's also a mentor, really kind of says it in the most beautiful way. He's Iraqi and from the United States. And he says how, my native land is being destroyed by my adopted land. So there's this tension, and you're sort of in between it. And and when I was looking at the culprits, naming, these weapons manufacturing companies, lobbyists, politicians, it actually came down to me also as a culprit, as a taxpayer. And so, this sort of all gets addressed, and this is a kind of an ongoing work, because maybe we can actually cue in and you can see the beginning part of this film, and then we can kind of continue the discussion after.
Sure.
Conflict is more profitable than peace. Conflict is more profitable than peace. Lahyan Massacre. On August 9th, 2018, Dozens of civilians, including at least 40 children, are killed on a school bus in Dahyan by an airstrike. The missiles were made by Lockheed Martin. Ahmed Zaid Hussein Tayyib, Yusuf Hussein Hussein Tayyib, Usama Zaid Ali Al-Hamran, Yahya Hussein Al-Bashari, Yunus Abdul Aziz Al-Hadawi, Yahya Mahdi Azzuddin Hurriya, Muhammad Abdul Salam Abdullah Sharim, Muhammad Yahya Yahya Faya, Yusuf Saleh Abdullah Al-Uqayli, Yusuf Abdul Aziz Al-Hadawi, Ali Zaid Hussein Tayyib, Muhammad.
Excuse me, that sort of kind of introduces the beginning part of it. And as you go through, there, rather than thinking about these documents that have come out of the, the longest war that the United States has been in Afghanistan, which is still continuing, and I would argue also that it's still in Iraq, that, all of these documents were coming out, Abu Ghraib and, ongoing, and they're always redacted. And I really wanted to flip the script on this, where in this case I highlighted. And so it goes through these different, and it really sort of reveals, it does the opposite from what I usually do, which is conceal. And so what you see in all those papers were in fact the papers that were around my studio. And I wanted to find a way. It actually showed in Beirut last year, in 2019. And I remember when people were going through, I unfortunately couldn't be there, but when people were going through and I had the binder there, I realized that only one person can see it. And so that's how it sort of turned into this video, which is essentially a sort of an abridged version of it. And I think this is something that, as long as the conflict is going on, it's sort of the labor of understanding why and archiving, because it doesn't feel like there are people or enough people or anyone actually who's archiving from all the sources of what's happening. And so this is actually a part of an upcoming show at the Benton Museum, which is going to be in Los Angeles, that's opening at the end of September, and it'll all be virtual. So this will actually be available online for the duration of the show, which will go until June 2021. And for me, this is sort of I think it's been told, and I have to agree, it's sort of this generous gesture to people who maybe don't even know what is happening in Yemen, as the beginning, to understand, or to be able to at least confront the next film, which is Mahjar. And so there's really no excuse to not know about Yemen, so that's conflict. And I think also there's this other series, which I know that you talked about, that you kind of prepared for, Under Thread. I think as I was making this work, it really became, I have to say I'm in a really privileged position, when I think all my family from my father's side is still in Yemen, people who are maybe, much more close, definitely kind of confronting the war directly. And I think there's this sort of this possibility of, how do you address that? How do you bring people, especially when in the United States we're banned, right? So there's no more place, and that even the blockades that are happening in Yemen, there's no more place for Yemenis to imagine themselves outside of Yemen, especially on this horizontal level. So to start thinking about other horizons. And for this, I think when I was making it, of course, I came back to thread. And when the work was still on the walls, I was tying the information with different colors thread to kind of make sense of it all. And, if we think about, if I'm sort of arguing that textile is a portrait of culture, then what happens when there's this systematic erasure that's happening to a culture, where, our architecture that we have in Sheba, for example, the oldest skyscrapers in the world, like the most, beautiful buildings in Sana'a, what happens when all of this is gone? It's essentially this unraveling. And I started thinking about what happens, I was kind of drawing on this story of the spider that Al-Ankabut, and I think I always really found how beautiful that was, because coming to the West, spiders are also seen as something negative. And for us, it's always about protection and about barakah. And so throughout this, throughout this binder, I do these interventions, this sort of these gestures of these photographs where it's the first time I'm also unraveling and revealing myself in this, and hopefully kind of bringing light and kind of, kind of clarifying this obfuscated information that we get that's coming out of Yemen. And so the series is called Under Thread, this play on under threat. And when I was taking these photographs, I actually did with two other colleagues, Nama Atias and Nekawal, who were colleagues at school, because I also needed someone there. There's also this sort of sensation of drowning, in fact, when you're underneath them, and the scarring that happens after, for a couple of hours that you feel when it's kind of put in, and thinking about passport photographs and even mugshots, like the criminality of what it means to be a brown body, and the passport, the difference between me and, my family in Yemen is a blue passport. It's a document, and that between the blue passport and a green passport, which can have all of that difference, and kind of acknowledging that privilege. And yeah, I suggest you watch the film. After working with this, I got into I think it was a little bit difficult, because I think at this moment when you're trying to make, what I found was actually, as we talk about the rage just kind of came into a little bit of despair, not really, this sort of paralysis actually in my practice, where I didn't really know where to go, or what was the kind of the point of making other work, except to continue making the binders. And I was really influenced by, I'd taken this class, and I think that's why with Colleen Smith, who I mentioned is also a futurist, I took this class, and what came up a lot was Afrofuturism, and I really dove into that, and I started looking at indigenous futurism, and I started noticing, while there is Italian futurism, all of the other things that actually, there's Sino-futurism as well, and I got really interested about what are the communities that are looking towards futurism. And they are actually, many of the ones that I found most interesting are the ones that were marginalized, or that there was a very, there was this erasure that was happening, but also that there was no space for them. And so because there was no space, they ended up creating spaces, so much that word is used. For example, Sun Ra, made the amazing film of, space is the place, also reading Octavia Butler, but also not even having to go so far from that, looking at the work of Larissa Sansur, and there are also Arab futurists, and I think that's also something that I'm a bit critical about, because we're all different, and that kind of furthers that narrative of orientalizing us, because we're all so different. And so I wanted to think about, if Yemenis can no longer, and particularly thinking about the diaspora, and particularly thinking about the future generations, who can look back to Yemen and think, where do I come from? What is it that we have? And me, who has grown up there and who has always been connected to it, that I still had to draw on what it is that it means to be Yemeni. And I really wanted to push away from the politics and religion. And so I was awarded the Alan Sekula grant for social documentary. And with that, I used it to go to Brooklyn, and to in New York, and to Detroit. And I worked with two incredible people, Iman Ahmed and Awad Ghazali. And Awad Ghazali actually left Yemen in the second year of the war, and came and basically built himself up from, he was kind of one of the fortunate ones, I guess, but he's also a very hard worker. And so both of them, I really wanted to ask, what is it that makes us the same, other than, what is it that we have in common, other than sort of this historical trauma And, how do we, again, intervene in this narrative? What are the things that we need to embrace? And of course, other than like, the food and the bukhur and the textiles, and even just the mannerisms of when you greet, an elder, that you kiss them on the shoulder and touch them on the feet. And, that the sort of, the performance of how we act in our architecture, that can actually also move with us, and it's ingrained in us. And one thing that was particularly beautiful was this story about Najm al-Ahmar. And I remember in Yemen, it kind of drawn me to that, because, when we think about the Queen of Sheba, which is also drawn a lot on in Afrofuturism, and included in also some of the, the religious texts, she's always sort of referenced in the West as the Queen of Sheba. And some would even call her Sheba. But actually, it's the land that's Sheba, Seba, and her name was Balqis. So, here we go, erasure, case in point. And she was the most powerful ruler, and her throne at the time, and this was about 3,000 years ago, and her throne was in Ma'rib, Yemen. And so it is believed that a great king, I guess we would even call like a wizard, right? Suleiman, King Solomon, wanted to meet her. And she said, if you do, then you must give me a gift the size of my power. And so he gifted her the red star. And we have this sort of, between Yemeni tales, there are these sort of something that I always thought was just that I had grown up with, but Iman had brought this up, and she always thought that Venus belonged to Yemenis, and that Venus was the red star. And Awad knew that it was this sort of mythical thing. And what I remembered was that, for me, I always thought about how beautiful is it that all Yemenis from 3,000 years ago to now, even now to like the 3,000 years from now, is that we all have this red star in common. And it's this sort of place of myths and this place that we are connected to. But then fast forward to 1997, when NASA sent the Sojourner Pathfinder up to Mars, 3 Yemenis tried to sue NASA for invading their inherited land. And from that, there was, a lot of sort of the BBC, The Guardian, CNN had sort of commented on it in a very mocking way. What are these 3 tribesmen trying to, are they kidding, basically? And it was really, and it's sort of featured in the film. So that's sort of the basis of that's kind of the point of departure where I start drawing and thinking about, even now in the time of, space colonization, right, and movement. And I think this might be an appropriate time, and we can talk about what it is that you're seeing on the walls after we see the installation. When I was installing this, there were these windows that I really wanted to activate. As photographers, we think about windows and mirrors all the time. And so, yeah, that's right. So what I decided to was actually turn it into a multi-channel installation that are sort of synced, in which they're constantly moving from left to right. Again, thinking about borders, but this block and this band, this barrier, and yet, the culture and sort of this tension, this conflict, but also the beauty exists throughout, and it breaks that border. And so, yeah, so you sort of, while they're speaking into each other, you'll see it. I think right now it's a little bit easier to see it in the single channel.
اليمن شفتها في جهاز الملاحة تبع كان الوقت ليل. طلعنا من الميناء اليمني ما يقارب الساعة 7:30 بالليل. كانت آخر نقطة شفتها من اليمن أضواء الميناء بعد ما يقارب 20 دقيقة. كأنه أنا ودعت طفولتي، ودعت كل شيء، ودعت 24 سنة في اليمن، ودعتها ورائي، ودعتها بهذاك الضوء الأخير. أيضا آخر نقطة عرفت أن أنا كنت فيها في اليمن
جامية لمن قارمرة ووكن معين لثوب لملحنمم لبن قهوة لوعلسم لرب بخور لمر مفتارة بلسنم راح.
The film is 14 minutes long, and this one is called Mahjar. And the part that you were seeing, in fact, is this, there is a sequence that talks about Balqis, which is overlaid with objects from the British Museum and from the Met, and from the Sackler collection that were actually robbed from Yemen. And thinking about how it is that even Yemenis can no longer access, not let alone come into these spaces, like to these countries, but also cannot access these spaces. The whole film is sort of tied together with two things. One, which is a spider, and the other is the sound of Mars. It's the recorded sound of Mars. And so that's why for me, the sound was quite important as this, because it becomes this, it's a part of that sort of sound installation. And I think it comes through in video. And what you were about to see, sort of, that's footage. So a lot of this is also found footage that is compiled from NASA, but that's brought from NASA, different parts of even UCLA, like different things that have come out from old Yemeni dancers. So there are sets of chori, throughout, which is also addressing not only our Muslim roots, our Jewish roots, of course, and what you saw was actually footage of when I was in Yemen last, which was in 2009, and I had filmed I went all through Yemen and I filmed it, and so that was of Bab el Yemen in Sana'a, that's overlaid with fireworks, kind of addressing this thing that we celebrate that is so nationalistic, and it's something so beautiful, but really at the end of the day, they're missiles. And so you go through and thinking about how this beautiful architecture, of which has become something that we've grown up in, is actually a part of military games in which military people are actually training, on how to target and occupy the places and destroy them. So they're, creating that tension. And then finally, there's also this tension between the anthems, the Yemeni anthem and the anthem of the United States. So we'll make sure to make that available with the recording. And then I think also thinking about the language that is sort of worked on. Again, it comes back to language. Maybe we can look at that, Mohammed, if that's all right. So what I started thinking about was also in terms of how is it that also I draw on, the Muslim, the Jewish, and also the Sabaean, which in that time, as we're sun worshipers, and this is also a part of who we were. How do we draw on all of that then for language? And all of these languages have actually have come not only because they've been abducted from us, but they don't necessarily serve us completely, right? And I think even people of the diaspora as well. And so I draw, thinking about the future, if I can, if we're talking about 3,000 years ago, then also thinking about the 3,000 years from now, this is essentially a letter from the future. And I started listening to ancient Sabaean, which is really incredible because when I first heard it, it actually the script very much looks like Hebrew, but when you hear it, it sounds so familiar. And when I heard it from my father, we both understood so much of it. And it kind of made me feel at the sort of edge of my my seat and like in sort of my deepest, at the ends of my nerves, that I could sort of be so connected to something. And so drawing from those, I pulled together this language, which actually I'll be doing a residency next year of trying to find meaning to it in Roswell, New Mexico. And so thinking about how, again, there's this adornment, right? There's a transcendence, and thinking about constellations and mapping through this symbolism. And this is essentially all the practices were done on textile. So it's the first time I'm making prints. And the materiality is activated by black light.
And so in the installation here, you had painted and created your own language that was melding these different languages you were examining, if that's correct?
Yeah, that's right. And I continue to. I mean, I think this is sort of the beginning of it. And in the film, I actually speak it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I think perhaps this is a good time to, before we jump into questions, maybe just talk briefly about what you're looking forward to next. You mentioned Roswell and other things, the Benton Museum. If you could tell us about what you're looking forward to.
Yeah, I'm really actually excited about doing this residency in Roswell. For people who don't know about Roswell, Roswell, New Mexico is a place that's known for the UFO sightings, unidentified flying objects in the 1960s, but it's also close to the sort of Area 51, and I think it's kind of attracted a lot of that lore. But also is an incredible place to look at stars and to sort of examine them. And I was fortunate enough that they gave me a year-long residency there. Thankfully, that's fully covered. So from the isolation of COVID into further isolation, which I'm pretty excited about. And I'll be working on the third part of the film. And hopefully I'm also really excited during this Benton project is, when you're thinking about futurism and how to sort of place, where do we place ourselves? I've been really quite interested in looking at other Yemeni artists and cultural activators who are particularly of the diaspora and how they're responding to it. And I put my handle here on, if you can see it, Studio Alia Ali, and through the stories, and I'll be featuring different really amazing cultural activators who are from the region. Of course, many who've worked with you at GPP, Inti Bint, Shema Tamimi, but also people who are in the United States, Muhammad Murshid, many, Saif Radi. So you can kind of find them on my stories, and hopefully you can follow and see what are other things that are coming out. And I'm also excited because I'll be doing some stuff with GPP. So here we go. So we have some, I think GPP's been doing really an amazing job with, I wouldn't say job, but also this, there's these prints for sale for Beirut, but also supporting the print sale for Yemen, which Sheba Tamimi and Inti Bint have done, which they raised $20,000 for Médecins Sans Frontières. And I think that that's really important, of keeping those two, of course, there's about making this platform for artists, but also about issues. So I really commend that. And so Mohammed and I have been talking about it. And so this is actually one of the works that's going to be shown at the Benton, but it's the first time that it's going to be launched. And so it's exciting. Thank you, Al-Sarkal, for giving us the platform to launch this here. And the Hub series, so there are 45 photographs, but they come in sequences of 5 and can be moved around. And this is the first time that I made my text thinking more about how language, even words like madrasa or talib, Taliban, have been sort of in the media, have been kind of removed. These really peaceful words have been kind of really spinned into the word for terrorist or the word for, kind of training camp, when really it's the only words that we have for school and student. And these are words that I think this is not something that's just Yemeni, it's just something that many Arabs or even, Farsi, like you can't speak on the plane, it is something that's actually been used against as a threat. So using these same modes of propaganda that has been used against us, I wanted to, if there was one word that I would want for people to non-Arabophones to be able to recognize, to be able to say, and to be able to spread, it would be the word for love, which is hub. And it's also the word for seed. which I think is quite relevant.
Thank you for making these available for us at El Circle Online and for GPP. And if anyone's interested, please get in touch and we can talk to you more. And that'd be a great way to support Alia for her work and what a beautiful, beautiful piece of work. So I think this is a good time to have a Q&A. So I'd like for a brave soul to please come on up and ask Alia a question about her work or something she shared with us tonight. You can use the chat, or you could, we'll give you a platform up to ask, to get your audio up and ask Alia or a question. So the question is, can you tell us more about the men that tried to sue NASA? How far did they get? Good question. Alia?
That's a great question. Who did that come from?
That is from Raz.
Raz, thank you so much, Raz. Very brave soul for being the first. Actually, nothing really came of it because they were actually just mocked. And I think there were also sort of some problematics of, does it belong only to them, to these three? And what is it, is it for them to later on take certain parts of Mars and then kind of divide it up? Who is it? And I think for me that, of course, those are kind of the complications of the story. I think that's also the beauty of it, not of the story of the happening, but either way to say, I think the way that I interpret it is sort of like, fine, if that's our inherited land, but also for me, I see it as like, those are our inherited myths, those are inherited history, that's our inherited, and so, don't occupy that as well. But nothing really came of it. Like I said, in the different articles, they were just mocked and sort of pushed to the side. And I guess for me, this is also a little bit of an homage to say, well, I'm taking you seriously.
Right. Okay, we have another question. I'm going to read this. Thanks for this. My question is about the love series, the Hub series. Alia, you mentioned using the same modes of propaganda to get non-Arabophones to recognize the word for love and spread it. I wonder, what are these modes of propaganda specifically whose use you are flipping / co-opting?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. And who is that? Who's it?
That's from, sorry, I should have said, that's from Jad.
Okay, hi Jad, thank you so much. That's actually a really good question. So, I think right now this is the way that this is a new series. So for the exhibition at the Benton, there's, what we have right now at the time, the ways of propaganda that people were using it were basically through the media, and there was this sort of silencing. Other ways of propaganda, I would say, would be even the ones that I acknowledge are like through Google, right? How do you kind of push that in? And I think for me, the ways of propaganda would be activating the public. And so a way of doing that is also embracing the conditions. So when there will be, rather than being an opening for the exhibition, there will actually be a book launch, because a book is coming out of this whole series, which is was incredibly designed by a fabulous artist named Kimberly Barella, and has writing with Michael Rakowitz. And I think during that, I'm going to be making, there will be these squares on Instagram, so where people can also just keep spreading it and also kind of going back to what this message is. I think also there will be masks that are being provided by, that are being, so that rather it's essentially what's on the mouth. And I think those are different ways. I mean, I have it on everything that I possibly can. In fact, I've been started putting it on jackets, and at the school I was thinking about also doing stencils so that people can go and stencil their own stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see if there are other ways of which you, I think there's also an important, when we're thinking about propaganda, of not veering away from the violence of it, and yeah. And I'd be curious to see if you had any other thoughts on that.
You mean Jad? Yeah, let's, Jad, if you want to weigh in, please feel free to do that. Miranda, do you have anything for Alia so we can keep the Q&A moving? We'll take a couple of questions, then we can end, but go ahead, Miranda.
Yeah, there's one thing that that you said in previous conversations that I keep thinking about, and it's, as you are part of the diaspora, that, there are certain things that you can take with you and others that, are left behind. And I think that question of what comes with you and what is left behind is really interesting in relation to your work, because I think, when you talk about these men being mocked, that audience is assuming that myth has to be left behind, that now we're here in, the present, and those myths no longer have a place. But I think what is interesting about what you're doing is saying that, yes, it does have a place, and I'm bringing this with me. Can you talk more about that?
That's as you were saying that, it actually draws me back to like the beginning of this conversation, where I bring in my work and it's mocked as decorative into the West. And there is a place for it. And there is a place for these myths, and this is like a case in point in which I would say, where actually I thought that there was a real relevance to this, and why not? I was looking at the moon. I think we started this conversation. I was looking at the moon yesterday, and it's strange how close it felt. It felt so much closer than Yemen, and yet we can look at it at the same time. And thinking about how all the symbolism, with my mentors like Mercedes Durrami, who's this indigenous artist, phenomenal one. We talk about these celestial, even you think about the crescent and the star, right? We talk about the celestial bodies that are so much a part of our lives, and yet and when it's turned purely to something that's science, which I also don't reject, because I think that that's also fascinating. But does that mean that science negates all of the weight of thousands of years in which that has sort of inspired, drawn, provided light, provided connection? So, I don't think that that's, I think I went on a digression there, but I think that these things are sort of relevant. And I think that's also, when we say, if our objects are so beautiful and precious and they're being housed in these museums, then why aren't our stories? Why are they being removed from why are our narratives being removed from that and put into vitrines in languages that have captions that are ones that we can't even read? And so I think in that part, it's an unfortunate labor and responsibility for us as artists to have to address that. And so it's not really a choice to not be, in this yesterday I had a conversation of a podcast, and the woman, Yusra, is for Tavan Studio. She's amazing. And she says, she's also actually based in Dubai. And she asked me, she said, do you consider yourself an activist? And I said, well, I don't think it's much of a choice, one, for many of us. And two, in this regard, I think it's just human to respect and to acknowledge where these objects came from, where they, and so if it means that this story is going to push aside, it might be really amazing because it was actually threatening.
Right.
Oh my gosh, 3 Yemenis are trying to claim and trying to put this. Well, then what about all the other indigenous communities in different parts of the world to say, yes, us too, get off that star? And, ironically, it's so much easier to push it aside because, NASA and many of the scientists who have they've already started mapping out Mars. And it doesn't have to be Mars, but it's just such a perfect example to see that it's already mapped out with the names of, European and North American scientists who found these craters. So I think that's also something to think about. What does it mean to name and rename?
Ali, there's a question that's come in that's kind of related to what you've just been talking about, where the question is, it's from an anonymous attendee who says, who asks, do you consider it a responsibility or a privilege for an artist to challenge stereotypes and reductionism?
Can you repeat that one more time? Do
you consider it a responsibility or a privilege for an artist to challenge stereotypes and reductiveness or reductionism?
What's the last word? I'm sorry.
Reductionism is the word that the person is used, or reductiveness.
Do I think that it's a responsibility? I can't speak for other artists, to be honest with you, because I also think that there's yeah, you said a privilege or a responsibility. A privilege, absolutely, because of the position. I can't speak for other artists, so I'm going to speak for myself. So for me, I'll address those separately, because I think a privilege, absolutely, and it's something that I always have to check myself, you know, and also continue looking at my practice, you know, like different problematics that kind of come up in my practice, but also trying to yeah, I think it's a privilege, because look at where I am. And I had the privilege of going to, just for the fact of having a passport, of being able to travel to different places. If something happens, I would be immediately evacuated. You know, being able to make work, you know, and that doesn't mean that you have to come from a wealthy family, because I certainly don't, but also just to have the education and space to be able to speak for myself and make it. So privilege, yes. And being able to have traveled and come into contact with so many different types of people, and have the space to be able to hear and listen and be heard and listen. Now, on the other flip side of it, I think I've also had the privilege of being excluded, and being able to be this sort of, you know, have a foot in many places, and because of that tension, also be able to create that other space in which can be mine. Now, is it a responsibility? I feel like, I think for me it has been. It's just become such an integral part of my work. It's something that I think about. I don't think that it's a responsibility for other artists. I also don't think it's a responsibility for me, because I also think that I have agency. And if I want to make work about palm trees, it'll probably still turn into then I should be able, you know, but I think that I have a voice, and I've worked really hard at creating the platform. So I think always kind of see that as a bit of a responsibility. I think the danger is when it's seen as a burden and expected, where, you know, if something happens, you know, how if you are this person and you're categorized, if you are all of these things and you are categorized, then this is how you need to think. I hope that answers the question.
That was great. And yeah, and thank you, of course, to Well Circle Online for, and the team, you know, Bestin on the tech, Fiza and C and Nada, and all the people at Well Circle for giving us this platform and making this happen. And the guys at GPP, who I know have been working hard, Finn, and Emily and Raz. So thank you all